How should athletes add Olympic lifts into their training? Do high rep squats actually make you stronger? And how can you fix your front rack mobility? In episode 23 of the Last Set Best Set podcast, Coach Calvin and I dive deep answering these questions and more. And if you want your question answered on next week's episode, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. Welcome back to the Last Set Best Set podcast. I'm Coach Brian. I'm the owner of Big Ben Strength. I've been teaching Olympic lifting for 11 years now.
And I am Coach Calvin. I'm current captain of Lindenwood University's Olympic weightlifting program, as well as national university champion, also a coach through Big Ben Strength.
And today we're going to be answering some questions that you guys submitted to us, starting with question number 1, which comes from JD, who asks, do you have any advice for athletes in other sports who are looking to add in Olympic lifts for power to their already existing programs? Great question, and one that honestly I'm surprised we haven't really touched on because a lot of athletes are using Olympic lifts in their training, or they should be at least. So real quick, what are some of the benefits that you see for athletes when it comes to Olympic lifting?
When it comes to Olympic lifting, a lot of athletes in any sport are contact athletes. It's a huge one. So moving something externally. Obviously, you can do this in a lot of ways in the weight room, but there's nothing quite like a good clean or a good snatch or jerk. Specifically, the clean is one that you have it right up against your body. You're receiving that weight, and you have to be very coordinated with how you move it. That's one that I think is huge. Wrestling, football, lacrosse, any other kind of contact sport. Is huge because you have to learn how to organize your body to move an external force and then receive that external force again. So you look at this combination of maximal extension and maximal flexion. So extending as fast as possible and then flexing to get under the weight as fast as possible as well. Happens in a lot of other sports too. Like if you just think about like watching a wrestling match, like you see people doing that exact thing, extending as fast as possible, then like receiving a load and that kind of thing as well. But the more general approach that most people take when they think about the benefits of Olympic lifts for like your typical field sport athlete, soccer, football, maybe baseball, even whatever, is vertical power. You can get this a lot of ways. You could do a loaded jump, but it's not quite the same as the proprioceptive, abilities you have to do to complete a good quality Olympic lift. You have to organize your body in a very specific way to complete that Olympic lift and produce that force in the exact right way to complete the lift. So you're going to be building a ton of vertical power, which you see in a lot of sports, especially when you're running. You're going to build up a lot of capacity for sprinting, that kind of thing as well.
And I think what you said there about not just the ability to create power and launch weight up, but also the ability to absorb that power without letting your positions change is really, really helpful, especially if you're doing any sort of impact sport, right? Just being able to be strong when things are hitting you is generally a good thing to have, as well as just the power benefits, right? And that is the thing that you can't really replicate with a trap bar jump or something like that. And so I think the next thing that people tend to talk about when it comes to Olympic lifting for athletes is that the Olympic lifts are too challenging to learn. And that's just something I fully disagree on. I have taken athletes who have never picked up a barbell before and taught them how to snatch or taught them how to clean and jerk in an hour. It's not all that hard to do. A lot of the time, this is just said by people who don't have a ton of experience in the Olympic lifts, whether teaching or doing them themselves. So they're not that hard to learn. And really, you just need to have a good, simple progression to work with somebody from. If that's a coach. If you're an athlete, then you really just need to find a simple progression to learn the Olympic lifts from. So with that being said, I think let's go ahead and get into the progressions that I would use to get somebody who's already training in the weight room and to start learning their Olympic lifts. There's 2 ways that you can really go about it. So the way that I think about it for number 1, and this is the ideal way to do this, is to first start incorporating Olympic lifting specific strength work. So what I mean by that is front squats, overhead squats, and a military press, a strict overhead press as the foundation. These are kind of the foundation of your Olympic lifts. We need to have a good clean. You need to be strong in the front squat. You want to have a good snatch. You need to be strong in the bottom of an overhead squat. And you want to have a good jerk. You need to at least be able to press weight overhead safely. So that would be the starting point, right? If you're not incorporating those movements into your training, those would be the basics. And so if you have 4 to 6 weeks where you can really afford to put a little bit of extra time into those and not have to worry about progressing any faster than that, then that's all I would simply do. I would take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 3 times a week to start just practicing those movements, getting the feel for them, maybe adding a little bit of weight if it's appropriate, and just getting strong with those exercises before we start progressing into like stage 1 of the Olympic lifts. So what I would do then, and this is something that you can do if you are in the other type of people who just want to start getting those power benefits immediately, is to start with stage 1 Olympic lifts. So for us and the progression that I use in Weightlifting 101, which is our free beginner program, which you can find linked in the description below, we take you through a 6-week progression where we're going to do a week of learning the snatch and clean and jerk from the hip. Now, you probably could benefit from doing this for 4 weeks if you're okay with extending out your timeline a little bit. At least learning the snatch, the clean from the hip, and then in the jerk, I like to start with double pauses where we're going to pause in the bottom of the dip and pause in the split position. And this is just kind of entry-level Olympic lifts. Pretty much anybody should be able to do this. If you are able to hold a barbell overhead, then you can do these Olympic lifts to some degree. Now, if you don't have the experience with the overhead squat and the front squat, and we're trying to get the benefits out of this immediately, I would say do a snatch from the hip and then ride it down into an overhead squat or add an overhead squat in after that. And then do a clean from the hip and ride it down into a front squat or add a front squat in after that. And then for the jerk, what I like to do is start with a push press where we're getting some leg drive into it, and then a double pause jerk. So we're practicing that technique. And then over time, usually about every 4 weeks, we add a little bit of an extra layer to the technique here. So instead of going from the hip, we might be pulling from the floor with a pause at the knee for both the snatch and the clean. And instead of doing a double pause jerk, we might be pausing only in the split to just check in, but still make sure that we have good dip mechanics in the jerk. And then finally, we would progress to just being able to do full speed snatch and cleans from the floor and full jerks without having to pause anywhere. And that's pretty much the progression. It's pretty simple. I think people tend to overthink this. I would simply just add in, maybe start with 2 days a week of Olympic lifting days and add those into your lower body training on whatever day of the week that you are doing those. I would recommend adding them in before. You don't want to do them after when you're already very, very tired. It's hard to learn technique that way. But that really should do the trick. What do you have anything else you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think I really like for the people that already have experience with the Olympic lifts. Like, let's say you've been doing cleans for years at this point, but you don't necessarily know how to implement them into your workout. Like, I think that's kind of like a big section of people. Um, I think you almost want to be doing them. Like, say you lift 4 times a week, 2 hours each. I would say do it like 3 of those times.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're working up to a max. That doesn't mean you're doing a ton of reps. Like, maybe it's just 20 minutes at the beginning. You're working on your front rack, just getting mobile there. I mean, a lot of athletes struggle with their front rack mobility. The more practice you can kind of build over higher frequency is really important. I'd say the same goes for the snatch. So if you just do like 20 to 30 minutes of snatch, in the beginning of your workout, it's really not going to take away from the rest of your workout very much. It's not going to take away from the skills work you have to do for your sport the next day. But it's still going to work on that overhead position, overhead squat. A lot of athletes struggle with that too. They struggle being balanced and strong in the overhead squat. Just add them in. Like, it's probably, if you don't push them very heavy, it's not going to take away from the other stuff you're doing. But it's going to help you get better at those movements over the long term, especially if you're in the off season. Be doing these in the off season, people. I really recommend that.
For sure. And then just a couple general tips if you are adding them into your training. I wouldn't really recommend going, I would say at first, I wouldn't recommend going over about 3 reps on the Olympic lifts. That's generally a good rule of thumb. And I wouldn't really try and push the weight on these until you feel like every time that you do a clean, it's pretty much the same. Now that's just a loose guideline if you don't have anybody keeping an eye on your lifts. But you guys can post your videos if you are new to the Olympic lifts or you're checking out our free beginner program. You can post your videos in our free Discord, and we'll give you some technique help on that. So hopefully that helped you out there. But if you are an athlete and you're interested in learning about Olympic lifts, we are thinking about putting out a weightlifting program for athletes. So if you'd be interested in something like a 9-week power program, leave a comment below and let us know. Up next, we discuss whether high rep squats actually make you stronger. But first, I wanted to let you know about the OlyStrong team. The OlyStrong team is my flagship coaching program. You'll get access to your choice of 3 or 5 days a week of training, complete with demo videos, exercise notes, and technique tips, daily video feedback of your lifts, just post your videos in the session comments or in our Discord group, and unlimited coach messaging to ask as many questions as you like, such as how to modify your training for your travel this week. You'll get all of this for $19 to $29 a month, and you could try a free week at the link in the description below. All right, back to the show. Question number 2. Do high rep squats only build muscle and not strength? So, Calvin, you want to talk about this a little bit?
For sure. So on one of our last podcast episodes, I mean, if you're a regular listener, you'll know that me and Brian are both big fans of including bodybuilding style training, accessory work after your Olympic lifts and strength accessories. This is a huge part of our training philosophy. You got to get bigger to get stronger at a certain point. A lot of people just need to add more muscle to their frame if they want to get stronger long term. Anyways, we had some disagreement, a little bit of debate in our comment section. This person has since deleted their comment, but we wanted to talk about it still. And their kind of main point was that high rep squatting would only lead to what's called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. It's kind of like the fluid component inside your muscle. It's not the actual muscle fibers growing, but it's like the fluid around them, that kind of thing. And so they're saying essentially that doing high rep squatting only leads to this, and it won't actually lead to increased muscle mass.
Or even increased strength.
Or that's what I meant, won't lead to increased strength. So they're saying, I guess, that it would build useless muscle that's not doing anything.
Right. That, like, back in the day, people used to say, like, high rep stuff built show muscle and low rep stuff built go muscle. That was how I remember hearing a lot of people talk about it.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think, like, the way this person's thinking about it, the way that kind of, like, assumption is that, you know, doing 10 reps on the squat, okay, all sarcoplasmic. Doing 5 reps on the squat, all what's called myofibrillar, where, like, you're actually growing the muscle fiber. That's really just probably not the case. Now, after talking to some of my professors, my advanced exercise physiology professor, he said there's not really a ton of research into this exact topic. But what we can likely assume is that it's not all or nothing. It's probably, if you're watching the video, I'm using my hands here, it's probably like a little bit different. It's not this huge difference that you might assume when you're kind of really getting into the weeds on this kind of topic. So pretty much, like, what we got to take there, you know, if research isn't super clear on this topic, let's just look at what the best athletes are doing. Let's try and see what good weightlifters are doing in their training. And you know, a good example comes to mind. When I stayed with Hampton Morris, I learned kind of a lot about how he programs his training. And essentially in every, you know, major block of training, they'll do at least 1 week of high rep squatting, of 10s on the squat. If they got 6 weeks to prepare for a competition, one of those weeks is like high rep squatting, you know. If they got, you know, only like 2 or 3 months in between comps, maybe it's a little more. But they're always including a little bit of it in the beginning of a training cycle. So that's one thing that came to mind when I thought about it. But then, obviously, we see people that do weightlifting at the high level doing, like, kind of really different stuff sometimes. We think about maybe Carlos Nassar or the Bulgarian method. I highly doubt that they're doing anything above 5 reps in the squat, kind of ever. And so kind of what we know about the Bulgarian method, that can kind of tell us that. But we also know something else about that kind of training which is that Bulgaria is kind of historically known for high drug use, that kind of allows them to train this way and still maintain really high levels of muscle mass and performance in there. And I know you had some interesting thoughts on that as well, Brian. What was that?
Yeah, so I think I think the way that people approach this is really interesting because they tend to look at what the best in the world are doing, as like an end all be all. That should be what we're doing. If they're the best, I should do exactly what they're doing. But I think that they're ignoring a lot of like the base of what they did to get to that point. Somebody like Carlos Nassar, he's probably not going to benefit a whole lot from doing something like high rep squats because one, he's got to stay in a weight class, so that's an important factor. He's also so strong that potentially doing high rep squats might actually slow him down, or he might feel like it's not going to actually help him all that much. So that's one interesting thing. But the majority of lifters are not anywhere close to that level. No one, like, especially in America, I think that Americans tend to be coming from a deficit when it comes to their weightlifting training. They haven't been doing the Olympic lifts since they were a young age. A lot of the time, they haven't even really been in the gym or been under an experienced coach who knows what they're doing. So really, we're generally behind in a lot of training. So I am a big fan of high rep squats. One, because they're just going to build muscle, and at the end of the day, for most people, building more muscle is directly going to build more strength. Like it is going to. Whether the research is inconclusive or not on it, training more will build more of what you're trying to do. So that's generally a good thing to look into. But also, if we're to kind of look at if we were to kind of look at how the history of training got to this point, a lot of how we program and how most coaches tend to program is based on a lot of older Russian sports science. But we also know that a lot of that Russian sports science was tested on athletes who were using drugs. So it's can be a little bit hard to just go off of the information that's coming from there. And so also, if you don't know why Russia isn't allowed to compete right now, go watch the Netflix documentary Icarus. It is wild. It is a very interesting documentary. I recommend everybody check that out for sure. But yeah, so generally athletes are coming from a deficit, and if you are a new lifter, meaning you haven't been doing weightlifting for the last 5 years, you're probably going to benefit from high rep training. You're probably going to benefit from building more muscle, but that doesn't mean that we're doing that at the expense of practicing our technique, at the expense of getting stronger. We're not doing high rep training all year round. It is just something that you should do probably for an 8 to 12 week block, one, maybe two times a year. And then the rest of your training should look like normal weightlifting training in the 3 to 5 rep range for a lot of your strength stuff, and the 1 to 3 rep range for your Olympic lifts. Like that's most training. But then sometimes it can be helpful to do more high rep training outside of that time zone. Did I miss anything on that?
Yeah, I think you just summarized it really well there right at the end. Like, this isn't what we're doing year round. Like, we're not saying like train like bodybuilders, like do like upper or I mean like chest, arms, shoulders like year round. Like no, like I think we're
Right.
very clear about that when we talk and our other more muscle building based episodes that we've done. Um, you know, one upper, one lower, one core movement every day for accessories. Um, it's going to help build muscle long term, but it's not going to, take away from your training in
Yeah.
some major way. And the same goes for high rep squatting. It's 8 weeks of, probably only 4 weeks of tens. Maybe 4 weeks of eights, and then you're back to 6 or 5 reps
Yeah.
after that. Like, this isn't a huge drawn out period of time, and likely you're not good enough that you need to be doing sets of 3 and 2 all the time anyway to like
Right.
keep your efficiency up, like with those really heavy weights. Like if you're only squatting 180 kilos, which is a big number for a lot of people in high level weightlifting, 180 is like a clean and jerk for most people, most men. And like if you're only squatting that, like you probably could benefit from doing some tens. Now, if you're squatting 280 kilos, yeah, let's probably just stick like with the between 1 and 5 reps to keep you at that level, to keep you competing because you're probably going to the World Championships in 2 months or whatever anyway.
Right, right.
So the priorities just totally change, but depending what level you're at.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, like, just to finish us off, for anybody out there who's listening, don't get lost in the weeds if you're also weak.
Yeah.
If you're not that strong, like, we don't need to get super deep into the nuances. Do the bread and butter of general strength and conditioning that always works, and you're probably going to get some benefits from it. And then as you get more advanced, we can start to dial in and perfect that for people.
I saw a really good post about this. I totally don't remember who posted it, but they said like training is like baking a cake. Like there's some really major components, like for instance, like the main ingredients, the flour, the sugar, the milk. Like you need to have the snatch, the clean and jerk, the squat. What temperature you're putting the oven at, is like how many reps you're doing or something like that. There's some really major components that make up like 95% of how the cake is going to come out. And then there's little parts like, did you get the expensive frosting versus the regular frosting?
Right, yeah. Like adding in little flavor notes, like, oh, a little hint of citrus in this will be really nice.
It's
But
like how
it's
many
not the whole cake.
we use. Like it's really not that big a deal.
Yeah.
So let's focus on those main portions and make sure we're doing those main, ingredients super well, and then our cake's going to come out great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Up next, we discuss how to fix your front rack mobility. But first, a quick word from Calvin.
Hey guys, quick interruption to the video to tell you about my 12-week weightlifting program. This program is something I put a lot of time and effort into, so be sure to go check it out. The program takes you through a few weeks of volume, strength phase, and then finally ends off with a peaking phase, ending out the program. It comes with a demo video showing you how the program works, how to use it, as well as exercise videos for all the complexes that are used throughout the program. Be sure to go check it out down below, and let's get back into the video.
All right, let's go and get into question number 3, which comes from Mason, who asks, what are tips for keeping your shoulders back and chest up in the front rack position? So, great question. Thanks for submitting it. There's actually an interesting thing here. We don't really want the shoulders back in the front rack position. We do want the chest up, yes, but we don't want the shoulders back in the front rack position. The reason for that is in the front rack position, we want the bar to rest on our shoulders. So if the shoulders are squeezed back, then we don't have anything for the bar to rest on, right? So then we are taking the brunt of that support in the wrists and in the arms. And if you're having to rely on your arms and your wrists to support weight, you're never really going to be able to push your front squats heavy enough to get much benefit out of them. But also that's probably why your wrists hurt a lot of the time. A lot of athletes complain about wrist pain in the clean and in the front rack position. Most of the time that's what the issue is. So really we want the shoulder blades to be pushed forward or protracted and slightly elevated. So if you have a hard time with that, one, I would just start with trying to do that on your front rack position and see if that makes it immediately better. But some people do have a hard time with that front rack position. So my best advice to you is to get your scap moving, right? Up and down, forward and backward. Protraction, retraction, elevation, and depression. Those are the technical terms that people will use for that. So one of the easiest ways that you can start working on protraction, pushing the shoulders forward to create a good front rack position, is an exercise that's in our free mobility guide, which you guys can find linked in the description below, is scap push-ups. Scap push-ups are a super simple way to start working on your front rack position. 2 sets, 5 to 10 reps before every front rack workout that you do. It's a great way to just get that position going. That's great. But you can also do other exercises like rowing is kind of a big part of moving the scapula. So I really like ring rows as a beginner exercise for people to figure out how to start doing that, or TRX rows, right? And then dumbbell rows is another great way to start building up that area as well. But then hopping up on a pull-up bar and doing either pull-ups or scap pull-ups, where we're doing kind of the top half of a pull-up, imagine shrugging down, right, and pulling our shoulders down into our armpit. That can be another good way to just work on movement of the scapula in general. And so I would say that would be the biggest thing to fix that front rack position so that your shoulders are forward, not back. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one. I actually brought this up in my one of my classes when we were demonstrating the front squat in class, and everybody was talking about, oh well, like how do like my wrists like aren't mobile enough to get there, and even my professor kind of was under the impression like, oh yeah, it's like wrist mobility. Here's a good guideline: if you can do a push up or hold a plank position with your arms right under, you have enough wrist mobility to
Yeah.
do a clean properly. You don't need more than like 90 degrees or so to be able to do that clean. The rest of it is all in your upper back and your lats.
Hmm.
That's all it has to do with. Um, so finding ways to open up that is going to be the key to getting that better front rack.
Yeah, for sure. So if anybody's struggling with their front rack position, check out that mobility guide. It's split up into 4 sections based on what the most common weightlifters are going to struggle with. So either squat depth, front rack mobility, snatch mobility, or jerk overhead mobility. Like that's pretty much it. So go check it out if you struggle with any of those areas.
Up next, we shout out a few lifters and listeners who are killing it right now. But first, did you know I have a free beginner program? Weightlifting 101 is a complete guide to learning the snatch, clean, and jerk using the progressions that I've used to teach thousands of lifters in a 6-week program. It's got everything that you need to learn the snatch and clean and jerk, as well as common lifts like the back squat and front squat. You can get your copy for free at the link in the description below. All right, back to the show.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get into the last section of the day where we're going to shout out a couple athletes that we think need some more recognition. These are sometimes up and coming athletes that are doing really well. These are sometimes our own athletes that we're coaching that we just want to shout out who are killing it, or just some people that we think did something cool. So who's your first athlete that you want to shout out here?
So my first athlete is going to be somebody I coach. His name's Ricardo at rico.lifts_. And his PR on the clean and jerk is 265 pounds, so about 120 kilos. And he did a clean plus 2 jerk at 255 pounds.
It was
So
a
that's
2 clean, right?
2 cleans and 2 jerks at 116 kilos. So literally just 4 kilos under his best.
That's nuts. And
So,
and the re-rack too on that makes that complex so tough. Like
oh
harder
yeah.
than a clean and jerk double, for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. So 2 cleans, then 2 jerks. A very hard complex to do. And you'll see this, like, this is a really good spot you want to be in where your, variations of those lifts. Like, I would, if he did a clean plus 2 jerk or 2 cleans plus jerk at this weight, I would be like, dude, we're killing it. But literally 2 cleans and 2 jerks, just 10 pounds under his PR. Like, he's showing that you don't need to always have some crazy new high 1 rep max to be making progress and know that it's gone up.
Yeah, for sure. And there's this like special period of training every now and then that you'll get into where you start hitting like your max or right under your max on like really challenging variations or complexes where you know that your 1 rep max has gone up and you just haven't tested it yet. That is a special time in training because that can really build a ton of confidence. And anytime I get there with somebody, I love that. I love that period of time. That's really great because some crazy gains are about to happen.
Oh yeah.
So what's up?
What about your first video shout out?
So the first lifter that I want to shout out, I came across this guy on TikTok. I first saw him like 2 weeks ago, and then he popped up again. Mar with a 260-pound snatch. So he's a senior weightlifter, senior high school weightlifter out of Leesburg. And Leesburg always just has great athletes, great technique. They're always putting up pretty big numbers too. So shout out Leesburg, but also shout out Mar because he hit this 260-pound snatch, and it just looks like he has way more on the tank. But he also hit like a 305 clean and jerk, I think 2 weeks ago. And same thing, like this guy looks like he's still got more in the tank, and their season is just starting to get to that postseason time where we're going to see some really big numbers. I think we could expect to see him hit some pretty crazy lifts, like a 125 snatch. I wouldn't be surprised, and definitely wouldn't be surprised about hitting that 315 clean and jerk that a lot of people are chasing. So yeah, I want to shout out Mar. He's also committed to Warner University. So that's the only scholarship weightlifting program in Florida. So he's committed to them. He's gonna do really well there. So shout out Mar for sure. Who else are you looking at over here?
So something that I saw, some of my buddies over at All South Barbell in Atlanta, This is a gym that really that Hampton goes to a lot on Saturdays for his heavy day. Um, Now you see different cultures in different parts of the country for different gyms. This is a really cool one. They have a heavy Saturday culture. They're always going heavy on Saturdays. And Anthony, or Ant-Man, his at is in trance 94. He is, a high school teacher. I'm not totally sure how old he is. I think he's late 20s or early 30s. But having a full-time job and still putting out training at a really high level. He snatched 140, clean and jerked 170, around low 90s body weight. Like, that's huge, dude. Like having a full-time job and doing that is just crazy. But he's showing that it's very much possible to keep doing weightlifting even at a high level, as you're going into your kind of like next phase of life, when you're not in high school or college or an athlete actively. So I
Yeah.
think that's super cool.
Yeah,
And
for
he's a
real.
super nice dude as well.
Yeah, and 140, that's 308 on the snatch. Like that's a big deal. And then 170, that's 375, is that right? Yeah,
Yeah.
dude, that's crazy. That's awesome. And I followed him and All South Barbell for years, and All South was one of those teams where they've just been around for such a long time that, like, when I was first getting into coaching and taking athletes to competitions, here in Tallahassee, we either had to go down to Orlando or Atlanta for competitions, and so it was like, once a month we were traveling for competitions. And All South always hosts great ones. So yeah, shout out All South, shout out Ant Man for sure. All right, the last athlete that I'm going to shout out here is one of the athletes who's been doing our weightlifting club. She was also on our high school weightlifting team too. But lately, she has been just taking off. So this athlete Manya has added 13 pounds to her snatch, so about 6 kilos to her snatch in the last 3 weeks, going from 55 pounds to 68 pounds on the snatch, and then added 11 pounds to her clean and jerk, going from 80 pounds to 91 pounds. She's just been putting in the work, and we've got a competition coming up this weekend that she's doing her first USA weightlifting meet. So I'm really excited to see how this goes. Yeah, so shout out Manya, and shout out to all the athletes out there that are still training. If you guys want us to take a look at your lifts, just tag us in your lifts, and we might feature you on the next episode. Calvin, where can people find you?
At Calvin Lackey 81 kg on everything.
And you guys can find me at Big Ben Strength on everything. Make sure to check out our programs and content down in the description below. We'll catch you guys next week. Bye.